internationalism at the core of our movement. That means solidarity with international movements. BDS is a global movement. Solidarity means working on the humanitarian issues that are so desperately needed by the victims of war, like in Syria, like the whole question of demanding that the U.S. put more money into the humanitarian work. It means giving voice to people who have no voice, like the nonviolent protesters in Syria, like the people of Afghanistan who have such little voice available here. Some of you know that the Iraq Veterans Against the War, who I think are one of your sponsors tonight, are doing a hearing in Washington, bringing together U.S. veterans of the war in Iraq, the U.S. war in Afghanistan, with several young Afghans to talk about the health consequences, and a couple of Iraqi doctors to talk about the health consequences left behind in Iraq. We have to redefine what solidarity means, what I spoke about earlier in terms of seeing the nuance of solidarity with people, recognizing that there may or may not be a specific organization that can be our counterpart at any given moment. And we have to include alternatives. When we say no missile strikes on Syria, that's a huge victory when we win, but that's not enough. The war in Syria is a brutal, horrifying war that we have an absolute obligation to be demanding an end. So what does that mean? It means that we have to provide alternatives, like saying we need to support the talks in Geneva, plus those talks need to include an arms embargo on all sides. The U.S. has no basis telling the Russians and the Iranians to stop arming that terrible regime if we are still arming that terrible opposition. And if our friends, quote, in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey and Jordan are not prepared to stop, then we should be demanding that the U.S. cut its entire military sales to all those countries. Now, that's probably not likely to be a victory right away, given the $60 billion arms deal that the U.S. just cut with Saudi Arabia, for instance. But that should be part of our demands, that we demand that there be not only talks, but an arms embargo, stopping all arms to all sides. That we have talks that are based on international law, human rights, and equality, not just talks for the sake of talking. Quote Netanyahu when you need to, who said, he was talking about Iran, but it could also be all these others, that a bad deal is worse than no deal. Talking is good, but if talks are designed to prevent a solution, talking is not good. We have to build on the weakening of AIPAC. We can't just sit back and say, wow, they're getting weak, that's a good thing, yay. We have to work to make that stronger and to replace it with a discourse based on international law, human rights, and equality as what should be the basis of our relationship with Israel and with Palestine. This isn't about, we stand with the Palestinians against the terrible Israeli occupation. This is about, we stand for international law, for justice, for equality, and that's the basis on which our diplomacy should work. And finally, we have to build our movement. We are a small component of the people that are in motion across this country. In the midst of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, we need to bring constantly to people that are working on jobs, to people that are working on immigrant rights, to people that are working on housing, on all of those issues, we need to bring the evidence of why the foreign policy issues, the issues of war and peace, have everything to do with why people don't have jobs. That when we're spending billions on war, that's why we don't have money for health care. We have to bring that material, those facts and figures, the New York State $2.5 billion just to the Israeli military, who knows how many billion to the war in Afghanistan. That's our obligation. That's our responsibility. And that's why we need Brooklyn for Peace. Thank you.
Phyllis very correctly said we need Brooklyn for peace. Sam's going to tell you why and how.
I'm sure you're all pleased to have witnessed such a cogent analysis and a brilliant far-reaching vision that Phyllis has organized.
Louder.
Of course, to bring these programs on and to enlighten you all takes money. And we are a nonprofit. We only have one paid staff person. And it takes a lot of volunteer effort and a lot of resources to get this together. So we do hope we're going to be circulating some containers. I think Vermont has one there. I think there's one on the other side. Please give generously, so you can support ongoing activity like this, okay?
Thank you. We're going to have questions in just a few seconds. I do want to allow my co-vice chair, Rusty Eisenberg, to say a few words, both about what's going on in Congress and to pose a question or two.
Well, I think I'm sure there's enough questions here without my contribution. I want to thank Phyllis, first of all, who, at great inconvenience and transportation woes, nevertheless came here, and I think the Phyllis people really want to hear you, and I think everybody
I hiked up from Washington this morning.
that everybody here really appreciates, what you had to say, and probably be here for 3 more hours with the issues you talked about. I just want to do a very quick sort of update on the congressional situation, and especially as it pertains to people here in Brooklyn. I want to reiterate actually something that Phyllis started with, which is how significant it was that that Congress actually did become an impediment to an attack on Syria. And Phyllis also made a very important qualification or sort of pointed to the complicating factor here, which was that opposition was really a combination of things. It wasn't just one thing. So it was a mobilization from the anti-war side, as well as on the right, and actually just also a lot of Republicans who just like to make things miserable for Obama in any way they can. The one thing that Phyllis actually did not say, which I will put in here, is that she played a really crucial role at a certain moment, together with 1 or 2 other people, in really pulling together anti-war people to move very quickly and efficiently to try to stop those attacks. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I think it is an object lesson to us that we do have a role to play. It would be better if we were stronger. All right? I mean, I don't think we should be delusional about it. We need to be a whole lot stronger. But on the other hand, I think it's also true that absent that anti-war mobilization, that this was a situation where it's very likely that there would have been an attack on Syria. So this is no small thing. Much the same is relevant to Iran. And I think when we had a forum here a month ago, and Jed and I were talking about this, there was this other moment on Iran, which was this miserable Senate bill S-1881, which our own senator helped to write in case we needed a drafter. That was Schumer.
Go Schumer.
It was and it was really designed to torpedo those talks. That was its obvious purpose. They very quickly got 59 people on there, 16 Democrats, and the rest Republican. And then it stopped. Okay, at 59. And they were just stopped. And here as well, there's really a combination of factors that came into play, and all were important. This was a case where the White House finally took a stand on something and tried to build a firewall. So they rounded up, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein and Carl Levin, all these people usually on the side of war, and got them to take a clear stand, and that was extremely important. But the other thing that was important was, again, the mobilization of the anti-war movement, which at a minimal made people stop and think. And it was very important that that bill be stopped, actually. Now, AIPAC did not go away, in case anybody is wondering, because you're going to be on another thing. They have not stopped. And the latest thing they realized they couldn't get a bad bill through. Okay, that's really important, that this was not a moment that they could get a bad bill. So, absent a bad bill, they went with a bad letter. And so there is now a new Senate letter on Iran. Once again, Charles Schumer is one of the authors of this. And this letter, which I guess we should post a link on our website to.
That's our Charles Schumer.
Our Charles Schumer.
Right. Brooklyn's own.
Go check.
This letter is not as damaging as the bill, because the bill would have been a law. It's also been watered down somewhat. I'm not going to even try to describe it because it's really boring. But the point is, it has about 8 different provisions, each in its own way designed to throw up obstacles to an to an eventual agreement. And just as an indication of the resurgence of AIPAC, as of right now, there are, I think, 82 senators who have signed this. As of right now, and about 18 that have not, if I'm doing the math right. Not only has Schumer authored it, Senator Gillibrand has actually signed it. But again, this isn't quite as bad or quite as damaging as the other thing. So where does that leave us? And I'm sort of laying aside the complexities of the people in the House of Representatives who are always switching back and forth. Right? There was a very good letter in the House of Representatives that was authored saying that people wanted negotiations. On that letter, Yvette Clarke and Nydia Velasquez signed in favor of that. That partly represents our efforts there. Other Brooklyn representatives never signed that. But where the situation is right now is that it's very fluid. You know, I was saying to Phyllis, it's not like a simple thing. I say, okay, you know, S210, this is what we're all going to rally behind, because it's gotten very complicated. But there's something underneath it that is not complicated, okay, which is that there are tremendous forces, certainly emanating from Israel, emanating from AIPAC, that are bound and determined to derail that agreement. That is not going away at all. And at the end of the day, for this agreement to become a reality, Congress has to pass a bill that will take the sanctions off. It is not just something that Obama can do unilaterally. This is something that the Congress will have to pass. And so in that respect, our work is really continuing. You know, whatever it is at any given minute, there's an underlying thing that we can all keep our focus on, which is the need for this administration and for this Congress to support a diplomatic solution to this problem. We do have a letter that we've been circulating. We want to get more signatures on it, and we want to get more people, you know, spreading that letter around. The letter in and of itself is not going to stop anything, but it's part of our effort to build pressure on our own congressional delegation going down the road so that they understand that here in Brooklyn, that people really want a settlement of this issue. They don't just want, you know, an endless polarization and danger and counter threat. So that'll be upcoming. And the final thing, just add to what Phyllis said, we have barely begun to touch here in Brooklyn the military aid we give to Israel. We've done almost nothing about that. And it's a disgrace. And it's important that we have that dialogue, that we put it into the public sphere as something to talk about, and that we bring it back to our members of Congress. Even if, you know, people all start yawning and saying you're crazy and that'll never end or whatever, it is absolutely outrageous. And we need to be raising our voices to talk about that at the same time as we struggle for diplomacy in these other areas. So I'm going to stop. I know people have lots of questions for Phyllis. So.
That letter is on Facebook, and you should all, should all go to the Facebook page, the Facebook events page for the letter, like it, and then invite your friends to sign it.
Okay, we'll take some questions, starting over here.
Louder. I was just saying it was terrific, thank you. Was so the $3.2 billion has already been authorized for 10 years, and I know it's been allocated, but is it actually appropriated?
Yeah.
Appropriated.
Israel actually, the question was about the military aid, if it was actually appropriated. Among other privileges that Israel only gets among other recipients of military aid, they get the most of any country. They get it first. They get it all together in the first quarter. Every other country gets it divided in quarterly payments, sort of to assure, good behavior or whatever. And they are the only country that is allowed to spend 25% of it on their own research and development and their own military contractors and war profiteers that compete with our war profiteers. Everybody else has to spend 100% on the U.S.
And is that subject to the sequester? I know there's some question about it.
It is, but it's meant a tiny, there was a debate about it and there was some outrage when the Israelis actually asked that they said, could we be exempt from the sequester? And nobody in Congress thought that they could say that with a straight face, so they said no. But it was a very small cut. It was a very small cut.
Do you think that there would be a difference in the situation if the Republicans won in the Senate and took over the majority? What would be the difference?
Did everybody hear
The
that
question
question?
was whether it
Would there
would
be
be
a difference
different.
if the Senate went to the Republicans in this next election?
Yeah, you know, it's really hard on international issues these days. The war and peace questions, although there tend to be the extreme right wing, you know, the McCain, Graham militarists happen to be Republicans. But support for war is huge in the Democratic Party.
Right.
So on our specific issues, it's hard to know. I mean, it would depend who's the president. There would be a lot of factors. But I think it would be a mistake to assume that
We know who the president is. I mean, as of November.
oh, I know, I'm just talking about in general, I'm not just talking about right now, but I'm just saying that it would be a defeat, I think, but mainly it would be a defeat because of all the domestic issues, where it would be an absolute disaster in terms of the Social Security, in terms of, well, everything, all the issues that we think are important, of jobs, education. I mean, it would mean racism would be running amok. It would mean an end to all of the achievements of the gay and lesbian movement. It would mean a complete halt to anything on immigrant rights. So it would be a disaster. On the questions of war, it would make things a lot harder. One of the things Rusty said is very important that I haven't mentioned, that on the sanctions against Iran, those sanctions are not all imposed by the White House, that can be lifted by the White House. It's like what they did around Cuba. You know, it was 20 years after imposing sanctions in Cuba, suddenly they realized, wow, we could get a president that might just decide, oh my God, to lift them, we better make it permanent. So some of the sanctions against Cuba are now laws that would have to be undone, which is way harder than convincing a president. So it's important, but it's not necessarily the most important.
Just for the sake of historical completeness,
Could you stand up, maybe?
Sure.
It's a little hard to hear.
Just for the sake of historical completeness, what happened over Syria, to a large extent, was due not only to the anti-war movement, but the fact that Russia had prodded Assad into agreeing to give up his chemical weapons, which gave Obama the wriggle room to back away from his commitment to strike if they were proved to be used.
Absolutely right. I think that the political side was that what opened the way for Obama to want to find wiggle room. That wiggle room was already there. He didn't want it until it became politically untenable to think about going to war. But you're absolutely right that Russia is what gave him the face-saving way out.
Yes.
I want to thank Brooklyn for Peace for this event. I've relocated back to New York from 30 years in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
where I was part of groups like this, and we have the same struggle that we don't have the 20 to 40-year-old generation kind of sitting around in this battle. But I also live in Colombia, and Israel and the IDF is very, very present in Colombia. They're training the paramilitaries to set up checkpoints, and about 100 yards after somebody goes through a checkpoint are when the assassinations happen. It's very concerning for me and you mentioned the war profiteering, and it seems that Israel is really benefiting off of a counter-terrorism industry. And in our town, which is not far from Cartagena, they're doing that kind of fly over with the sonic boom, and the kids are urinating themselves in school out of fear of this kind of influence. So I wonder if this is happening in other countries, that Israel is kind of exporting this kind of population control, so it's very distressing. And again, it's illegal for them to be in Colombia, just as we ourselves, Obama has set up 7 military bases on the 5 borders that Colombia has with other countries. So that increasing militarism is going strong as ever, but really not getting the publicity.
It's a huge problem. Israel has become a global exporter of weapons. Not as much of the big weapons. They don't manufacture a lot of planes and tanks for export. It's mainly the avionics that run the planes. It's the electronic stuff that turns smart bombs into dumb bombs into smart bombs. And they're one of the manufacturers of drones. around, there's only 3 or 4 countries manufacturing their own drones. Everyone else is buying them from the U.S. and Israel, among others, are the top, among the top supporters. So the dependence of Israel on the maintenance of this sort of U.S.-led empire is very key, because their economic well-being, depending on whether you believe the CIA or the World Bank, Israel is either the 23rd or the 26th wealthiest country in the world. And a big part of that, a big part of their high-tech industry is high-tech weapons systems. That's what's making their billions.
Population control.
Gary?
You mentioned the natural gas pipelines as a factor in the Ukraine situation. Could you comment on the natural gas resources in Iran as a factor there?
You know, I don't think I'm enough of an expert to have a good answer. I mean, throughout the region, the resources themselves, the gas and the oil, and the pipelines are shaping the geography of a lot of these conflicts. I don't have in my head, I know people who know them in their head, people like Michael Clare and others, who can look at this map and describe for you exactly the struggle of the pipelines. You know, Afghanistan is one of the pipeline arenas because it has the misfortune to be between 2 suppliers. And one of the big questions is how to control for the West the European dependence on Russian natural gas. And that's where Ukraine comes into it. The other issue is Iran and Turkey. There's been this whole question of whether Iran's natural gas will be shipped out via Turkey or via Russia, and there's different possibilities. I don't think I have enough information to have a good overview of it. You raise exactly a crucial point, because these are ultimately resource wars: natural gas, oil, and water.
Water, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is about something you said, that if there was a deal between the United States and Iran, there would be a price, you used some word like price to pay with Israel. Would you expand on that a little bit more? And also, do you think there's some danger that there could, with your knowledge of Israel, of the country doing something crazy or dangerous, if there was a deal? Is that something we should keep in mind?
Well, the second part first. Israel is known for doing very reckless things on the assumption that they will be protected by the United States. This is one of the serious problems. If you read the interview that Obama did last week with Jeffrey Goldberg in Bloomberg News, it was very interesting. I mean, he said things more critical of Israel than he ever had before. But when Goldberg pressed him, for example, he said at one point, if Israel doesn't stop its settlement expansion, it's going to become harder and harder to protect them in the United Nations. And Goldberg came back and said, are you saying that the U.S. would stop its backing, stop protecting Israel? And without missing a beat, he said, oh no, we will always protect Israel, no matter what. But I'm just saying that it will be harder to get other countries on board. So it will be more difficult for us to protect them if they don't stop. You know. So that's a huge problem that the U.S. officials in Congress and the President still feel compelled to make these remarks about no daylight and telling the Israelis, no matter what you do, we have your back, we will make sure you are never held accountable, that your political leadership and your military commanders are never brought up on charges, are never held accountable for war crimes, and will never appear in The Hague. So that's the assumption, the operative assumption of Israeli leaders. And they're not wrong, they're not imagining something. But I think that my fear about the linkage, it's not anything that anybody's in an official position has ever said. But I think that Israel has made clear, Netanyahu has made clear, that the attack on Iran, the weakening of Iran, the prevention of Iran's nuclear program, etc., is the most fundamental demand that Israel makes of the world, and specifically of the U.S. That's what it wants. It wants the undermining of Iran. And the U.S. has been working very hard in the Bush years, in first Bush years, the Clinton years, and certainly under Obama, to convince the Israelis that we stand with you. We have this shade of difference, which is actually a qualitatively huge difference, of where are the red lines. You know, it's outrageous that anybody has red lines. But if they have red lines, it also matters where is the red line. The U.S. red line is we will prevent Iran from getting and having a nuclear weapon. The Israeli red line is much closer. You could argue the Israeli red line has already been passed. The Israeli red line is we will prevent Iran from having the capacity to build a nuclear weapon. And the problem is once you have a nuclear power industry and you have scientists who know how to enrich uranium, you have the capacity to build a nuclear weapon. Doesn't mean you can do it overnight, you need to do it more and better and whatever, but it's sort of the same thing. So that's a huge gap, and the U.S. has gone to great lengths with various levels of success to make it sound like that's not really a very big gap at all, that it's really only a little bit. But I think for that reason, we could assume that if the U.S. managed with its European allies, and with Russia and China participating, which is now somewhat of a question, at least for Russia, to get a real, serious, comprehensive deal with Iran, which, if it was going to happen, will not allow, this is one of the most important things that's not in this new letter, which is so important. The Israeli position is that there can be no Iranian uranium enrichment, that it has to be dismantled altogether. That's never going to happen. The Iranians have made that clear, and the U.S. has made it clear that they accept that enrichment is okay. It will have to be very carefully monitored and this and that, but there will be enrichment. If the U.S. makes a deal based on that, they're going to have to do something to placate Israeli official opinion and U.S. Israel supporter public opinion. And I'm afraid that that something is going to be paid in the coin of Palestinian rights.
I assume that most people here know about the Technion, the drone research that's coming to Roosevelt Island soon. And I also want to make sure people know there is a demonstration regularly outside of Google headquarters on 8th Avenue and 16th Street, I think it is, to protest that. Google is also involved in that. It's research to manufacture drone technology. So I just want to make sure people know about that. The protests are under New York Act. I think it's Action Against some Technion, something, what?
Cornell Technion.
Cornell Technion, right.
Okay. Yes.
So some of you might not have heard, but in January, the mayor, Bill de Blasio, actually had a behind closed door meeting with AIPAC.